I have something for you.
Oh, you really shouldn't have. This means a lot.
Hey, my name is Caleb Hutton. I'm 45 years old, and I run my father's cattle ranch along the Tongue River, about 15 miles outside Sheridan, Wyoming. I've spent half my life on this land, and the other half trying to forget a desert I never asked to see. Most mornings I'm up before the sun even thinks about clearing the bighorns. Coffee black, boots on, out the door before the silence in the house has a chance to settle into something heavier. I check the fence line along the east pasture, first, then the water troughs, then I count heads until the numbers in my mouth match the numbers on paper. It's not much of a life by most measures. But it's mine, and it doesn't ask me questions I can't answer. My left ear's been mostly gone since 2004. An IED outside a checkpoint nobody back home ever heard about. The doctors at the VA call it sensorineural hearing loss. 70% of piece of paper could explain what it's like to only hear half a world. My right leg's got a titanium rod in it from the knee down. Doesn't bother me much in summer. Winter's a different story. Some mornings I limp from the porch to the truck like I'm 80, not 45. I don't go into town more than I have to. Folks mean well, mostly, but there's a particular kind of tired that comes from watching people decide how to look at you before they've said a word. So I stay out here, talk to the dog, talk to the cattle. They don't ask me to repeat myself, and they don't go quiet when I walk into a room. That Wednesday had been a long one. Calving season was still a few weeks off, but the weather was already doing strange things, warm in the day, sharp and mean once the sun dropped behind the mountains. I'd eaten dinner, standing at the counter, same as most nights, and was halfway through the dishes when somebody knocked on my door. Nobody knocks on my door at 9 at night, not out here. I dried my hands on my jeans and opened it, and there she was, Grace Donovan. Hair coming loose from its braid, cheeks red from the cold, a folder clutched against her chest like it might try to get away from her if she loosened her grip. I'd known this girl since she was 4 years old, riding on her daddy's shoulders across that same gravel drive I was standing on now. I taught her to hold a rein properly when she was 7. I sat in those folding bleachers at the county fairgrounds more Saturdays than I could count, clapping for her 4-H ribbons because Walter was always out checking on something that couldn't wait. I thought I knew every version of Grace Donovan there was to know. I did not know this one. The one standing on my porch with her hands shaking, 2 months after we buried her father, looking at me like I was the last solid thing left standing in her world. Grace. I stepped back so the porch light wasn't full in her eyes. What's wrong? She didn't answer right away. She looked down at the folder, then back up at me, and when she finally spoke, her voice came out smaller than I'd ever heard it. Caleb, I need a husband by Friday. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there holding the door open while the cold came in around her, trying to figure out if I'd heard her wrong. If maybe my bad ear had finally taken the rest of the words with it. Come inside, I said, before you freeze. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table her father had sat at more times than I could count, and she opened the folder with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since she walked in. Papers, copied and stapled, edges soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. Dad's will, she said. There's a clause. I didn't even know it existed until the lawyer read it to me 3 weeks ago. She slid a page toward me, her finger resting under one paragraph like she couldn't bring herself to read it out loud again. Full ownership only transfers to me if I'm married before my 25th birthday. If I'm not, Uncle Russell takes over as trustee. Everything. The land, the herd, the equipment. When's your birthday? Friday. I read the clause twice. It was the kind of language a small-town lawyer writes 15 years ago, for a man who never imagined his daughter would actually need it, read back to her like a verdict. Walter hadn't been trying to trap her. He'd been trying to make sure she didn't end up alone the way I had. He just hadn't updated the paperwork after his wife died. And now here we were. What does your lawyer say? That we could fight it. Get it thrown out in probate court. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something close to exhaustion. But that's 6 months. 8, maybe, and Russell already has a buyer lined up for the river frontage. Some development outfit out of Billings wants to cut it into 35-acre lots and sell them to people who've never shoveled a stall in their life. She looked up at me. By the time we win in court, There won't be anything left to win. I got up and poured myself a glass of water I didn't want, just to have something to do with my hands. Outside, the wind was picking up against the side of the house, the way it does most nights this time of year. Grace. I set the glass down. You were 24 years old 4 days ago. I bent down and lifted you onto my shoulders at the county fair so you could see the rodeo better. This isn't. I stopped, looked for the right word, didn't find one that fit clean. This isn't right. She didn't flinch. That was the thing about Grace. She'd always had her father's habit of looking straight at a hard thing instead of around it. I'm not asking you to fall in love with me, Caleb. Her voice didn't shake on that part, not even a little. I'm asking the one man my father trusted more than anyone else in this county to help me keep what he spent his whole life building. That's not wrong. She closed the folder, gently, like it still deserved some respect even after everything it had put her through. That's exactly what Dad would have asked. You know it is. I sat back down across from her. The clock on the stove read 9:47. Somewhere out past the dark window my cattle were settling into whatever cattle do at night, oblivious to the fact that the whole shape of my life was about to change at this kitchen table. If we do this, I said, we don't lie to each other, not about anything, not even the small stuff. Okay, and it's not charity. I'm not doing you a favor and you're not doing me one. It's a trade. Fair both directions. I thought about the stack of unopened mail on my desk in the other room. The FSA paperwork I'd been avoiding since spring. The VA forms that needed a second signature I never seemed to find time for. You're better with numbers than I am. Better with paperwork. I've got 8 months of farm bills I haven't even opened. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close enough to remind me she was still in there underneath all that fear. I can do paperwork, and I'll help you keep the land. All of it. However long it takes for the courts to sort the rest out properly, if we ever even need them to. She nodded slowly, like she was signing something invisible right there in the kitchen, something that mattered more than what we'd actually be signing 2 days later. Okay, she said again, quieter this time. Okay, I said back. Thursday morning came in gray and still. The kind of sky that hasn't decided yet if it wants to snow. The Sheridan County Courthouse smells like it always has, old wood polish and paper, and something faintly metallic underneath. Like every piece of furniture in the building has absorbed 80 years of nervous people, sitting in hard chairs. Wyoming doesn't make you wait around once you've got your license. No waiting period, no 3 days to think it over. You walk in, you sign, and if a judge happens to have 10 minutes before their docket starts, you walk out married. We got lucky. A circuit judge had a gap before her morning calendar and didn't mind doing us the favor. Grace wore a navy dress that still had the fold lines from wherever it had been packed away. I wore the only collared shirt I own that doesn't have a feed store logo stitched on the pocket. There were no flowers, no guests. Just the two of us, a court clerk who'd known both our families for 20 years, and didn't ask a single question she didn't need the answer to, and a judge who read the vows like she'd read them 1,000 times before, because she had. When it came time for rings, neither of us had one. The judge didn't blink. You can get those squared away whenever, she said, like it was a detail no more important than picking up groceries on the way home. Grace looked at me for a second too long when the judge said the word spouse. I looked away first. Outside, under the flag hanging dead still in the cold, Grace turned to me. That's it? That's it. Feels like it should have taken longer. Most important things don't take as long as you'd think, I said. It's the part after that takes time. I didn't know yet how true that was going to turn out to be. That evening, I came in from checking the herd later than I meant to, my right leg dragging just enough that I noticed it on the porch steps before I noticed anything else. The kitchen light was on. Grace was at the stove, and there was a pot of something going that smelled like it had real bones in the broth, not the kind of soup that comes from a can. She didn't say anything about the limp. She just reached over, without looking, and turned the second mug on the counter, so the handle faced my right hand. I stopped in the doorway, one boot still half-laced. You always stand on my right, I said. You always stood there for me first, she said, not turning around. At the fairgrounds, you used to lean down, so I wouldn't have to shout into your bad ear when I wanted to tell you something. I hadn't thought about that in years. I hadn't thought anyone but Walter had ever noticed. And the coffee, I said. hot, ready before I even ask. Dad used to do that for you. Every cold morning you came by. She finally turned around, ladle still in her hand, steam curling up off the pot behind her, like something out of a memory neither of us had planned on sharing. I guess I never forgot how he did it. I didn't have anything to say to that. Not anything that would have come out right, anyway. So I just sat down at the table, in the chair her father used to sit in, and let her set a bowl down in front of me like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, for two people who'd been married 11 hours to be having soup together in a kitchen that smelled, for the first time in 3 years. Like somebody actually lived in it. The first 2 weeks, things were quiet enough that I let myself believe we'd skate through this without much trouble. Quiet doesn't last long in a county where everybody's known everybody else's business since before they were born. It was Marcy at the feed store who told me, 3 days before the auction. She didn't make a thing of it, just mentioned it while she was ringing up my order, the way you'd mentioned the weather was supposed to turn. Russell's been talking, she said, down at the trail's end, telling people Grace married herself a man who isn't right in the head just to keep him from coming after the land. I paid for the mineral supplements and didn't say much. What was there to say? I'd heard worse about myself from people who knew me less. What I hadn't braced for was the rest of it. Saturday morning the county livestock auction was running full. Trucks and trailers, backed up along the gravel lot, the air sharp with diesel and manure and cold. Grace and I were there to sell off 40 head we'd decided not to carry through another winter. Numbers, Grace herself, had worked out 2 nights earlier at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, double-checking the math against last year's prices like her father used to. Russell was standing near the scale house, with 2 men I didn't recognize, both of them in clean boots that hadn't seen a barn floor in years. Real estate men. I knew the type even before Russell introduced them, the careful way they looked at the river frontage instead of the cattle. I heard him before I saw the crowd start to gather. Russell's voice has always carried, even when he doesn't mean it to. Caleb Hutton's owed Walter his whole life, he was saying, loud enough for the men nearby to turn their heads. Nobody ought to be surprised he's come around now wanting the land to settle the debt. The words landed somewhere low in my chest, somewhere I hadn't expected them to reach. I'd spent 20 years grateful to Walter Donovan, and never once thought of it as a debt with a number attached. Russell had just put a price on the one friendship in my life that never asked me for anything. Grace's hand found my forearm before I'd even decided what I was going to do about it. Don't, she said quietly. He wants you to make a scene. I'm not going to make a scene. I walked over anyway, not fast, not loud, just steady, the way you walk toward a spooked animal when you don't want to spook it worse. Russell. He turned, and there was something in his face, satisfaction maybe, like he'd been hoping I'd come over and say something he could use. Caleb. Didn't expect you'd want to talk, given the circumstances. You've got something to say about my marriage, you say it to me. Not to strangers at a cattle sale. I'm just stating facts. Grace married a man twice her age she's known her whole life, 4 days before a deadline that hands her the whole estate. Folks can draw their own conclusions. A few people nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. The auctioneer's voice kept going somewhere behind us, fast and rhythmic, oblivious. But the crowd around the scale house had gone still, in that particular way a crowd goes, still right before something happens. I kept my voice level, loud enough to carry, not loud enough to sound like I needed it to. She runs that place better than anyone gives her credit for. Numbers, contracts, the whole operation. She's done it herself since before I ever signed a thing. I looked at the 2 men in their clean boots, then back at Russell. If you've got something to say about my wife, say it to me. Nobody said anything for a second that felt longer than it was. Then one of the real estate men cleared his throat and mumbled something about checking the river access before the light changed, and the 2 of them peeled off toward their truck, like the conversation had suddenly stopped being worth the trip. Russell's jaw tightened. This isn't over, Caleb. It wasn't a fight to begin with, I said. Just the truth. I walked back to Grace. She didn't say anything either. Just slid her hand down my arm until it found mine, and held on through the rest of the sale like she needed something solid to keep her standing as much as I did. We didn't talk about it on the drive home. Some things don't need talking about right away. They just need to sit in the cab of a truck for 15 miles while the radio plays low and the fence posts go by. It was 2 days later when Grace got the call. One of Russell's hired men, a young guy named Tyler who'd worked his place for going on 3 years, had quit without notice. No 2 weeks, no explanation, just gone. Grace took the call standing at the kitchen counter, and I watched her face change while she listened. The way it does when someone's telling you something that doesn't add up yet, but is going to matter later. "What is it?" I asked when she hung up. She set the phone down slow, like it had gotten heavier in her hand. Tyler told one of our hands he left because Russell asked him to sign something. Paperwork about the river parcel. Tyler said it didn't look right, said some of the survey numbers on it weren't the same ones he'd seen the county post last spring. She looked up at me. He wouldn't say more than that. Just that he didn't want his name anywhere near it. I stood there a second, feeling the cold air still clinging to my jacket from outside. Feeling something else start to settle in underneath it. "Then we need to find out what that paperwork says," I said, "before Russell finds a way to use it." The storm came in faster than the forecast said it would. That's the thing about April in this part of Wyoming. The calendar says spring, but the mountains don't always agree, and a system can drop down off the bighorns and turn 60 degrees into a whiteout in under 3 hours. We were 11 days into calving season when it hit, which is about the worst possible timing there is. I'd had 40 cows due that week. By the time the wind started screaming sideways across the pasture, 8 of them had already gone into labor, and the rest of the herd had bunched up and bolted for the low ground along the creek, the way cattle do when they're scared and don't know which direction safe is in. Grace was on the radio with Dale, one of our 2 hands, trying to get a head count through static while I pulled on every layer I owned. 8 calves on the ground already," she said, her voice tight. "Dale says 2 of them are down near the creek bank. If they don't get dried off and moving, they won't make it another hour out there." I didn't say anything about my leg. There wasn't time, and there wasn't a version of that conversation that ended with me staying behind. The wind out past the barn hit like something solid. Not air anymore, but a wall of it. Thick with snow that didn't fall so much as fly sideways into every gap in my coat. I found the first calf shivering against its mother in the brush along the bank. Got it up, got it moving toward the barn, with Dale hauling the second one in his arms like a sack of feed. The cold had already worked its way past my boots, and somewhere in the dark and the noise, the leg that's never quite right stopped sending me any signal at all. No pain, no warning. Just a kind of nothing where my knee used to be, and then the ground coming up fast. I went down hard on the riverbank, snowpacking into my collar, the flashlight skittering off, somewhere into the white. I tried to get my good leg under me and couldn't find the angle. For a few seconds that felt much longer than they were, I just lay there listening to the wind and thinking, distantly, that this was a stupid way for a grown man to go. Then there was a light. Grace's voice cutting through the storm before I even saw her face. "Caleb!" And then her hands were under my arm, pulling with everything she had, which wasn't much against my weight, but it was enough to get me moving. We made it into the equipment shed, more by instinct than sight, the door banging shut behind us against the wind. She got me down onto a stack of feed sacks, pulled my boot off, and started working the leg, with her bare hands, like she could rub the feeling back into it through sheer will. "You scared me half to death," she said, not looking up. Her hands didn't stop moving. "I came out and you weren't answering the radio, and I thought, I'm all right. You went down by the creek in a blizzard, and you didn't even feel it happen." Her voice cracked on that last part, just slightly, just enough that I heard it even with the wind howling against the tin roof above us. "That's not all right, Caleb. That's terrifying." I looked at her in the dim light of the lantern. Dale had left burning by the door, her hair soaked through, her hands red and raw from the cold, and from working at my leg without a single second of hesitation. Something in my chest gave way then, some wall I'd been keeping up since long before she ever showed up at my door with that folder. "I've fallen in love with my wife," I said. She went still. Her hand stopped on my leg, and for a second the only sound was the storm outside, and both of us breathing too fast in the cold. "I love you too, Caleb." She looked up at me, and there wasn't a trace of doubt in it. Not the careful kind of love that hedges itself against disappointment. Not the arrangement, not the deal we made at my kitchen table. "You." I reached down and pulled her up against me, both of us still, half frozen, both of us laughing a little, at how long it had taken us to say something that simple, while outside the storm kept tearing at the world like it hadn't noticed the only thing that mattered had already happened. The hearing came 3 weeks later, once the roads had cleared enough for everyone to make it into Sheridan. The Sheridan County District Court has the kind of room that makes you sit up straighter just by walking into it. Dark wood paneling, gone soft with age. The flag standing stiff in the corner. The smell of old paper thick enough to taste. Russell's lawyer stood first. He laid it out clean and confident, the way men do when they've practiced a thing in front of a mirror. The marriage, he said, had been entered into 4 days before a deadline, for the sole purpose of circumventing the clear intent of Walter Donovan's estate. He used the word convenient 3 times. He used the word suspicious twice. Grace didn't flinch through any of it. She sat beside her own attorney, with a stack of folders in front of her. Folders she'd built herself, late at night, at that same kitchen table, long before any judge ever asked to see them. When it was her turn, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She laid out the ranch's full financials for the past 2 months, every entry in her own handwriting. A signed contract with the hay supplier out past Big Horn, negotiated and executed under her own name. Written statements from both our hired hands confirming who gave the orders, who balanced the books, who'd been making the calls on the operation since the day her father died. The FSA paperwork, filed and stamped, her signature at the bottom of every page. Russell's attorney tried to interrupt twice. The second time, Grace looked at him, calm as still water, and said, "Don't interrupt me again." The judge, a woman with gray hair pulled back tight, and the kind of patience that comes from decades of watching family money tear families apart, let the silence sit for a moment after Grace finished. Then she said the marriage met every condition the will required, lawfully executed, properly filed, no irregularity in the record. Full ownership transferred to Grace Donovan Hutton, effective the date of the wedding. She paused, before she set her papers down, and looked over the bench at Russell. The court also notes, she said, evidence suggesting irregularities in a recent land survey filing connected to the river parcel, along with testimony regarding pressure placed on a former employee to sign documents he believed to be falsified. This matter is being referred to the county attorney's office for further review. Russell didn't say a word. He just sat there, jaw tight, while the gavel came down once, sharp and final, and the room around us let out a breath it had been holding since the lawyers first stood up. 8 months passed the way good seasons do out here, fast in the looking back, slow in living. Through. We came out the other side of calving, with a stronger count than either of us had seen in years. 91 live births, off the Hutton side alone. Not one calf lost to that storm that almost took my leg out from under me for good. Grace kept the books the whole way through. Same steady hand, same kitchen table, except now there were 2 ledgers side by side instead of one. Hutton land, Donovan land, 2 separate names, 2 separate herds, run close enough together that we'd worked out a rotational grazing arrangement along the river that let both pastures rest and recover on a schedule. Neither of our fathers had ever quite gotten around to. We never merged the 2 places into one. Grace was firm about that from the start, and I never once argued it. "Dad built this," she told me one evening, going over the grazing schedule by lamplight. "You built yours. A marriage doesn't mean one of us has to disappear into the other. So that's how we left it. Equal partners. Fair. Both directions. Same as we'd promised each other in my kitchen the night this whole thing started. I started going back into town more too. There's a veterans group that meets Tuesday evenings at the community center on Main Street. Men and women who understand what it is to carry something nobody else in the room can hear. I'd avoided it for the better part of 15 years. Grace never pushed me toward it. She just mentioned, once, that she'd heard it was starting up again, and left it at that. I went on my own the following week, sat in the back, didn't say much. I've been going back most Tuesdays since. Late one evening, near the end of summer, we walked up to the rise between our 2 places. The spot where the Hutton fence line meets the Donovan fence line, where you can stand and see both ranches spread out below you at once. The sun was going down behind the bighorns, throwing that deep orange light across the grass that makes everything look like it's on fire and at peace at the same time. Grace stood beside me, quiet for a while, and then she took my hand and pressed it flat against her stomach. I didn't need her to say anything. I just stood there, feeling the evening go still around us, feeling something settle into place that I hadn't known was still missing. I used to think the years between us were a debt I owed her father. 20 of them, sitting there like an account that never got squared. Turns out they weren't a debt at all. They were just the years it took for me to become the man she needed, standing on this hill, at this hour, with her hand over mine. Thanks for listening to this story from Amora Stories. If it moved you, stay with us. There's always another one waiting.